Great. For today's episode, I have a very interesting guest today, and very pleased to have Guillaume Cabane on the show here for the Pathma Presents episode today. We're gonna be talking a lot about growth. Just as his new stint, Hypergrowth Partners, where they're looking into building up B2B companies to grow faster. And we're going to be learning all about that news project, but also going to dive a little bit into Guillaume's history, which has been super interesting. He's been an advisor for, probably the who's who in tech out there at the very moment, and actually be VP of growth, for places, for example, such as Drift. So Guillaume, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lucas, happy to be here.
Cool. So maybe tell us about your latest project, Hypergrowth Partners. What is this all about?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of money right now that's floating around in startups and being invested as angels gets minted through all of the exits and VCs, and it's not a great product. It's not a competitive product. Your dollars are as good as my dollars, and everybody says they're a value add investor, but truthfully, it's just the investment. And I didn't want to compete on that market. I wanted to be able to focus on where I was bringing a lot of value. Now, the thing is, advisory is very interesting, but the success rate of any given startup is the same whether you take the equity as an advisor or as an investor. It's still going to be like 10%, maybe a bit less, depending on the industry and the time. And as an advisor, realistically, how many companies are you going to be able to help any given year? A handful, 5, 6. So you could be going in like 2 years, maybe 3 years without any good, let's say, investment, right? As an advisor, any good pick and no exit. And that's kind of a bummer. So the idea here is to be able to bring like-minded people together who do advisory full-time like myself or part-time like others. And instead of taking the equity directly, we pool the equity together in something which operates very much like a VC fund. We have, equity in a fund that we will get liquidity and value from when exits happen, right? But then the partners can kind of normalize the outcomes, right? So that's probably the first thing. It's putting together the supply of advisory and the demand for advisory in a in a partnership that makes sense for everybody. Less friction, same contract, same terms, better pricing, better ease of access to advisory partners. We don't compete with VCs. We don't compete with agencies, nor with freelancers. It's just going to be like CMOs, VPs, more likely on the marketing, go-to-market side. That's where I have like all of my expertise and my connections. And all of those people will be able to get access to, let's say, the best deal flow, and I have a lot of people, like great entrepreneurs, asking me for advisory, right? And hop on a business case, a problem for a couple of months, maybe a year, help the company and get access to a fantastic fund made up of the equity for all those companies. That's what it is.
Very cool. So, if some teams are listening in here at the moment, trying to figure out what does it take, or what is that constitution of a company looking like that is working with you guys, maybe you could characterize a little bit the startups and types of companies you're working with.
Yeah. So like the name implies, we work with companies, that are reaching the inflection point of their growth curve. We don't focus on the pre-product market fit, right? That's not where we have the most impact. If your pre-product market fit, and you talk to me, most likely I'm going to offer some cash investments, because you really need to work on the product. You need the cash to be able to do that, and that's great. And my advice on like hyper scaling is going to do you no good. Okay. And likewise, if you're like a public company, I have a couple of those coming to me, like there's no way we're going to get equity. It just gets too complicated, right? Even if you're like Series F or whatever, like it just gets too complicated. So we focus on the companies between a couple millions of dollars of revenue, annual revenue, and let's say maybe like 100 million-ish in revenue annual. Okay, that's where there is, and generally it's around 10 million. There's gonna be an inflection, like your post-product market fit. You've found your first, set of early adopters, and it's working well. But now your VCs are asking you to do like 3x over your growth, and you've already reached 10 million. You're like, how am I going to do that, right? And that's where myself, having done that a few times, my main partner, Martin Gontovitas, who was at Off0 from like 6 people to the exit, which happened like 2-3 weeks ago. We have a lot of expertise building go-to-market teams and helping companies go through the hypergrowth.
Yeah, just sticking on that for just a little follow-up question. Is there particular verticals that you are, let's say, particularly excited about or particularly focusing in?
Yeah, obviously. So like, I mean, my main my main focus target is on B2B SaaS. That's what I've been doing for like more than 10 years now. And then, I mean, I have other partners who, have specific appetite for other verticals, but most of it is in some flavor of B2B. All right, most of it. We do not do anything in B2C. It's a very different world. But I mean, I do like e-commerce SaaS. I do like right now I'm doing something in a B2B fintech, right? So there's a lot of things in sub verticals that we're doing, but most of it is in B2B because there's a large, let's say, knowledge gap in B2B, and there's just not a lot of VPs of marketing and CMOs who have hyperscaled B2B SaaS companies. There are a few, there's just not a lot. So there's a lot of demand for that expertise.
Very, very cool. So maybe to wrap up, to learn about what you're currently doing, could you give us an idea, what is that experience like? If a team starts to onboard with you guys, maybe could you just, give a rough, maybe structure of how you work with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally what happens is that I'll look at the entire business, and I'm gonna look specifically at the funnel from the very top of funnel to like the revenue. And I'll identify where we have opportunities, underserved opportunities. And then I'm going to build a plan to match the bold plan, which is what 3x for actually over year. And the plan is, both on the hiring part, it's going to be on the go-to-market activities. What do I bring versus, the next CMO VP is that I operate in 6 companies at a time. I've done this a few times. And so I have a database of over 600 solutions that I store that address specific problems. For example, I'll give a couple examples. Your attendance on demo rate isn't good, right? Let's say that you have 40% attendance on your sales demos. Not good. How do you solve that, right? Well, you could have somebody in your team like try different solutions. I've already tried like 5 of them, and I know 2 that work really well. Okay. Let's say that your outbound isn't performing, or let's say that your ad. So all of those things from a strategic side, I've already seen most of them, and I can pattern match the right solutions. All right. And I can build a plan with confidence that solves the problem. So that's like probably like, let's say, discover and understand the problem, apply known solutions is step 2. And step 3 is what I've done at Segment, at Drift, and at Gorgeous, is actually build a growth team, help the company build a growth team, which will find unique solutions, outlier effects, okay, that even I don't know yet. Okay, so they can have that capability in-house. Why is that important? Because most companies I talk to operate in a competitive market. Okay, they have a solution which is maybe sure better, but they are competitors, right? There are other, let's say, replacement solutions. And if you do traditional marketing, then you're only applying, I'd say, some level of skills and mostly investment dollars to try to win over your competitors. And so it's mostly your product that's winning. Okay, it's not that much your marketing. Okay, the question is, how are you going to create incredible additional value through the marketing stage alone? Okay, how are you going to find outlier effects? When I build growth teams, they're really a team within a team. It's like a VC approach. Okay, it's about being able to experiment, try many different approaches to cracking the nut on a specific problem on the go-to-market side, and then scale what works. 1 out of 10 idea project might work, and it's going to pay back all the investments multiple times. And that's what I did at, for example, let's take Drift as a good example. Drift is a live chat. Is Drift a much better live chat than Intercom, the main competitor? I'd say debatable. Maybe, maybe not, debatable, right? But there's no reason why Drift should have been allowed to exist and grow aside from Intercom, right? There's no good reason aside from incredibly good marketing and very aggressive go-to-markets. Okay, that's the only thing. You couldn't say, oh, like Drift's product came in and was like 10 times better. It's like, it's a technological shift. It's not true. It's not true. Maybe slightly better in some ways, maybe not in other ways. Similar pricing, similar product. It's just marketing. So think about it that way. What are the things that we found that we did? We were able to unlock channels. We were able to find which customers were going to switch over. We were able to find which customers were going to renew their Intercom accounts and take them over from them. We were able to build a lot of those aggressive, I'd say, growth strategies. Each of them is just a tactic, absolutely. But the approach is a strategy.
Super, super interesting. Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit. We talked about what you guys are doing at the very moment. I just want to, pick your brain a little because you've had a lot of like practical experience, as you were alluding to, in the especially hypergrowth phase. So what I would be curious, right, within growth marketing, what comes to mind? When I ask you, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to innovation in growth marketing? What's the first thing coming to mind?
Yes, it's the culture of the company and how CEOs set up the teams. And so, there are many founders on listening here today. You got to understand that when you set up a product team and a marketing team, and you should, very important, right? Those teams are optimized for success at every project, right? If you have a product founder, a product leader that fails 2 launches in a row, or a marketing leader that fails 2 launches in a row, are you going to trust that person for the 3rd launch? Most likely not, okay? And so they incentivize for success, which means that they will front load the cost of learning, talking to customers, doing research. They will reduce the risk. Front load the cost, reduce the risk, okay? The growth marketing approach is exactly the opposite, okay? We're going to have a low cost of entry into trying and finding out if it works, right? So we try first and we find out if it works afterwards. It's the opposite approach. If you understand that, then you also understand that this needs to be a separate team. And culturally speaking, you need to explain that internally that, yes, they fail a lot, and then incentivize for that. Okay? They're not just moving to the next shiny thing. And it's not like they lack ownership on the failure. It's a different approach to solving problems. It's an experimental approach. So that is very important when you want to approach, let's say, the growth.
That brings me to the next question, because you mentioned those growth teams being implemented into those hypergrowth companies. What would you say is the biggest challenge when it comes to return on investment on implementing those teams? How do you think about it?
Yep. The biggest challenge is, let's imagine that the team finds an outlier effect, something that works really well. What happens next with that project? Do they maintain it and keep it alive, or do they pass it to somebody else? If they maintain it, okay, good, they're going to maintain it. And then, a month later, they find something else. They maintain it. A month later, they find something else. They maintain it. Eventually, they end up maintaining a lot of stuff. What is the negative consequence? Well, that slows down their ability to ship new things and iterate, right? And so they become a product team that's maintaining software. That's not good. That's not what you want them to do. If you have them ship stuff to other teams, then it creates a culture perception issue where it's like, hey, these folks can just like create stuff, push it to us, and move on with like absolutely no ownership. That's not good. So you got to find the right balance. That is the biggest, I'd say, a challenge, is finding the balance between speed and maintenance and ownership of maintenance.
Sort of the very last question in that direction, and I'm super interested to ask you that one, because you've been, well, advisor to Intellimise, you've been with Drift, you've been with Metkudo, and I'm so curious what you think, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to conversion optimization?
Yes. Conversation, I mean, the optimization of conversions on sites, start there, is about understanding that there is, thinking that there is one better average answer to the message, to the chat, to the banner, is a wrong approach. Okay, your customers come in all shapes and forms. The right answer is to try and understand who is this customer. Can we find their company? Can we find their role? Can we find their use case? Can we find the industry? And then try to craft an experience that is better than the average, right? That is very important. And that's why Optimizely kind of failed, a couple of years back at becoming the ubiquitous solution, right? It's because they were, not so much now, they've shifted, but they were optimized on like A/B testing, which is like, let's find the best average for everyone. That's nonsense. Imagine you have a site selling like shoes and saying, hey, size 44 for everyone. That's the average, right? It doesn't make sense, right? Everybody has different shoe sizes, right? Well, if your business, especially as your business becomes large, you got to understand that you've got to create an experience that is that makes sense from beginning to end. And I'll just close this topic with one good example. If you have a marketing team that does paid acquisition, most likely they have very granular ads and audiences in Facebook and in Google ads, and they have landing pages. And that's good. They do a good job there, right? And they're going to say, hey, maybe you have an audience that's excited about like a free trial, another one that's excited about like a custom service, whatnot, right? And you have a landing page with those words and whatnot. I guarantee 95% of businesses I look at, they have that. And then post landing page, it's one onboarding email path for everybody, one sign up path for everybody, and one sales path for everybody. Okay, so there's like this funnel crunch of the experience. They came in for something very, very unique. They had a specific need. It made them tick, and and then you make that entire, you destroy that information. You destroy the experience. So you got to keep this like, think of a layered cake, right? Obviously, I'm French, so I think of cakes, right? Think of this layered cake where you have like this one-to-one experience, like, but they have this unique experience from the beginning to the end. From the moment you click on the ad, they give you information. They want this specific feature. They want maybe this specific type of pricing. Keep that, inject it in the emails, inject it in the sign up, inject it in the app. The app onboarding should remind them of that. If they come for, I'm working right now with Ramp.com, which is a fintech company, and they have like at the same time business credit cards and expense management, just to simplify things. If somebody comes for the expense management, let's say solution, well, they should be dropped in the app on the expense management onboarding, not the credit card one. Otherwise, it's nonsense. Most companies don't do the job properly. So when you think of conversion rate optimization, think of what are my audiences, what are my buckets, and how can I create an experience that is relevant, that makes sense.
Great answer. Really like it. Very passionate as well.
Have to be.
Very good. Cool. So I would love to switch gears as we're slowly coming to an end of the interview. I want to know a little bit about your personal habits of educating yourself, because obviously, number one, you create content. Number two, there is a lot of content, and obviously you can get a lot of experiences by all the experiments that you run. What's your go-to way to educate yourself further and come to those types of realizations?
Yes, I've realized that there's kind of like a content cycle where the more refined and curated content is in books, right? But it dates back a couple of years. Generally, before it gets into a book, it's been like in a blog post, and before it was in a blog post, it was in a couple of like private communities, all right? And in marketing, I'd say this aging effect is specifically important because what works now will probably not work a year from now, okay? And so you really want to be at the cutting edge of what's being tried and what we find works right now. And so to find new ideas, I'm in private communities. I'm in a ton of WhatsApp groups and Slack groups and you name it, right? Absolutely. And I have those deep connections. I know what people are trying. I know the performance. And I invest time in there. Obviously, for the slightly more curated, I do follow a couple of my peers and CEOs I admire and know the blog that they post. But generally that's public, and so it's a very limited insights, right? But so I'd say probably like private communities is my go-to these days.
Cool. So since we wrap it up slowly, I would like to get into a couple of rapid fire questions. Are you ready for those?
Yep.
Very good. It seems a bit like an outdated question now, given what you just said, but what's the last book that you read?
I'm going to tell you the one I'm going to read next, which I'm excited about, which is a recommendation from Alex McCall, the founder of Clearbits, and it's the Great CEO Within.
Mm-hmm. What's the one single thing that your company or yourself are focused on the most at the moment?
Maintaining great reputation. It's the only thing I have. If I don't have reputation, I don't have business.
What's the last thing that kept you awake at night about your project?
My kids.
Very good. And well, the very last question, if today would be your very first day, maybe let's go back a little bit because you learned so much in the way. Maybe let's say it's your first days, joining Drift as an example. What's the one advice that you would give yourself?
Spend more time understanding the overall dynamics, the business dynamics.
I really appreciate
a bit more broad. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Guillaume, I really appreciate that you took the time for the Pathmark Presents episode today, where we learned about your latest focus, but also a little bit of what you've been learning along the way. So maybe just to summarize that, if somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed today, what's the one thing that they should remember about Growth Partners?
If you're looking at hyperscaling and going from 5 to 50 in the next 2 years, and you think that your top of funnel needs a review, shoot me an email, g@hypergrowth.vc.
Thanks for being part of Pathmark Presents today.
Thanks, Lucas.